Hey OIT fam, welcome to our first ever episode of Technical Deficit with Ray and Friends. Each of these episodes we're going to be tackling a different technical challenge of something that comes up in the MSP community. Well, documentation is probably first and foremost of the conversations that are being had right now. If you're following the Reddit sub, you probably noticed there are recent conversations on IT Glue versus Hudu versus all the other options. And I'm not going to argue which one's better or worse. That's not what this is for. This is purely to talk about the installation options available if you're going to use Hudu. Now, I've been watching Hudu for the past year or so with great interest. It had a lot of things I liked. It had good pricing. It had self-hosting ability, as well as a cloud option. It had a very frequent dev cycle. I kept watching and I kept seeing frequent releases with meaningful updates. I'm not going to mention any names, but we've seen out there where you're not always getting real updates every time there's some kind of software release. With Hudu, that's not the case. So about a week and a half ago, I decided I was going to take the dive in, and I wasn't happy with our current document management solution. And I said, let's give Hudu a try. I talked to some users who gave me glowing reviews. They said they were having a great time using it. No real complaints about it. I've talked to Jacob and the team over the past year. I've used support myself over the past week and a half. They've been very responsive and very willing to work with me. And even when I asked for things that weren't in the package today, their answer was, let's try doing this, let's try doing that. And if you still need it, let's talk about getting it incorporated into a future release. That's the kind of attitude I'm looking for when I'm selecting a vendor, especially something as important as documentation. So with that, because it's self-hosted and the recommendation is to host it on Linux, that might not be in the skill set of every one of the MSPs out there, but I want to make sure you guys have access to this. So with that in mind, I decided, let's go ahead and do a how-to video. Let's go ahead and I think our first episode of getting this installed. We're going to use DigitalOcean today, but I'm going to show you, you can do this on Vultr, you can do this on AWS. There's tons of other options. You're not tied to it. At the end of the day, it's just a Linux instance running Docker. Also a technology which I love, means it's transportable to nearly everything. It's fantastic. Excellent design choice, by the way. But we're going to do it on DigitalOcean for a couple reasons. One, it's one of the most commonly used. Two, if you sign up, DigitalOcean will give you a $100 trial for 60 days. You put in a credit card, but they don't charge you anything. And three, the steps are really easy. I think if you're going to get involved in this, DigitalOcean is probably the first place a lot of you are going to go. If you want to see some of these videos on AWS or Linode or Vultr or something else, or even your own Ubuntu instance, the steps are going to be nearly identical with the exception of API keys or object storage. But reach out to me, hit me up in the comments, shoot me an email, and I'll absolutely do those videos too. Because if it's important to you, it's important to me. But without much further ado, let's get started. So here, one of the things you would expect from a documentation company is that they're going to have a documentation for how to install it, right? And they absolutely do. I will include these links in the comments, in the description of the video, but self-hosting.usehudu.com, and you have here a list of everything you need to get done, including with a nice little overview, things like, your cloud environment setup. If you're going to do this, you can do this in your own environment, right? If you're doing a VM or ESXi, Hyper-V, whatever you're running, doesn't matter. We're going to do this cloud because that's the most widely applicable to the audience, right? There's going to be a few things you need. You're going to need your SMTP credentials for whatever email server you're going to use. You're going to need some object storage, and we'll get into what that is. It's not that complicated, but we'll get into it. Of course, you're going to need to set up DNS. You're going to have DNS pointed to your IP address. That's used for a couple reasons. One, it's used to access your instance, but two, it's also used with Let's Encrypt. Let's Encrypt lets Hudu establish an SSL certificate and renew it using certbot or whatever tool they're using, and it lets it do it on regular schedule, so you're always accessing your documentation over SSL, which I don't need to tell the MSP community why that's so important. So we're going to go to the cloud environment setup, and we're going to look at these steps. It's going to be a VM with at least 4 gigs of memory, at least 1 vCPU. They recommend Ubuntu 18 as the OS. We're going to use 20, and I'll tell you why in a minute. They don't support Windows. I will tell you, one of the benefits of Docker is that it's transportable. You can run it on nearly anything. However, this is a commercial application you're going to want to have support for. Make sure you're following the guidelines of the vendor. So we're going to go over here and we're going to go to create, and we're going to create a droplet. Now you could simply do Ubuntu, pick your version 18 or 20, and pick your droplet size. And that would install Ubuntu, and then you'd continue down the process of making your directories, installing Docker CE, installing Docker Compose. That's not a big deal. I personally found in one of my previous instances of doing this that there's some dependency issues with Docker Compose with the current version, and you actually had to go back and use 1.2.7 instead of 1.3.1 or whatever it is. Just to avoid all that, we're going to take advantage of DigitalOcean's marketplace. The marketplace has a bunch of apps that are already pre-made. Now you can actually see Docker's right here. Docker 19.03.12 using Ubuntu 20.04. So we're going to select that to make our lives easy. It's just taking care of those two steps I showed you. Now again, we're going to need the one that has at least 4 gigs of RAM in DigitalOcean. That's the $20 droplet. We're under the trial, so it shouldn't really affect you too much. I will tell you, I have gotten Hudu to work with the $5 droplet by creating a swap file with a 4 gig swap file. However, that is not officially supported by Hudu, so if it doesn't work, don't complain to them. I will do another technical deficit video showing how to do that, because I think it's a good skill set to have and understand how it works, and just as a proof of concept. But for this demonstration, we're actually going to go ahead and use the $20 droplet. Now, when selecting the data center region, you want to select the one that's closest to you, and that's simply because you want to have low latency. I'm on the East Coast. I'm going to go ahead and pick New York 3. Whether it's New York 1 or 3, I don't think it really matters. I'm going to use SSH keys. I already have mine saved here on DigitalOcean. You can use a password if you don't want to use SSH keys. However, I strongly recommend using SSH keys if you can. Definitely more secure. Go down here. We're going to pick a host name. I'll do Hudu demo 01, and then that's just going to be the Linux host name that doesn't really affect anything. And then if you want to add any tags, we're not going to. And if you want to enable backups, you definitely want a backup strategy. Now, Hudu does have documentation for this. I'll show you where later. If you use the DigitalOcean backups, just keep in mind they're only once a week, so that's not the best thing. I choose to back up a different way. So we'll go ahead and create the droplet. That'll get running. So as that's running, it only takes a few minutes. It's actually, or a few seconds. It actually happens really fast. We're going to go ahead and get started on our spaces. On the spaces over here, that's the storage spaces. So we're going to create spaces. Again, we're going to pick the one closest to us. In this case, you only have New York 3. There's no New York 1. We're going to restrict file listing. This means anybody that browses over to the public URI of your spaces, they're not going to be able to list the contents. They have to know what they're looking for. We're going to pick a name, Hudu demo, and then some random numbers. And then you're going to see it's going to populate a URL down here on the bottom. This is always going to be your region.digitaloceanspaces.com. It'll have what's called your bucket name right here. Now, this is important because we're going to use it later, and I'll show you where. Create the space. That one actually gets created very, very fast. I think our droplet is already ready to go. So there we go. We have our Hudu droplet. I'm going to take advantage now, and I'm going to create my DNS entry. So let's get that going. All right. So, and then the last thing, we're going to need our API keys, but I'm going to leave that for last. So the next step here we're going to have is we're going to need to create our environment file. Now, the environment file is pretty easy. We're going to go here. I know it's listed here. It's this step 8. Like I said, I'm going to be doing this a little bit out of order. I'm doing it where it makes sense. So I'll open this in a new tab, and let's start populating this. So your subdomain, you should already have selected what your subdomain is. I'm going to use hududemo.oitdemo.co. That's going to be what we're using here. For our bucket, we will go over here, and I will have my spaces. Now, the bucket name is this part here. whatever you named your bucket. So we're going to enter that here. The region is going to be whatever region you have it. That's that NYC3. So let's enter NYC3. If you're using Amazon S3 for this, you actually don't have to, you do have to add the region there. You don't have to add the endpoint. The endpoint is going to be this part here, nyc3.digitaloceanspaces.com, and you do have to put HTTPS. All right. And Hudu has excellent docs on this stuff. They tell you how to do it for Amazon S3, for DigitalOcean Spaces, including how to get the API key, which we're going to do next. So the next thing we're going to do is go back to DigitalOcean. Down here on the bottom left, the last option is API. You're going to skip this section. You're going to go down to Spaces Access Keys. These are very important. These API keys are going to give access to be able to upload and download files from your object storage. So you want to be careful with it. We're going to give you a name, Hudu Demo. Again, I like creating random numbers. It doesn't affect anything on the naming here. It's just a name for reference. You're going to copy this key, and we're going to put it in the environment, in the access key, and we're going to copy this secret, and we're going to put it in the access key secret. Now, you want to document this, because once you're off this page, if I go to billing and I come back here, I will not be able to see that secret again. Okay? So be careful with that. You can go back and you can regenerate a key. You get a new key and a new secret, but you'll never be able to see that secret again. So be careful that you document everything you have here. Now for the SMTP domain, we're going to use OITDemo.co, which is what we use for these demos. For the, let's see here. For our SMTP address, I'm going to use smtp.postmarkapp.com. I like Postmark app. You can use SendGrid, Mailgun, SES, whatever, SMTP to go, whatever you want. Use 587, the username and the password for SMTP to go. And this is going to come from Hudu at oitdemo.co. Easy enough. Now, when you do all that, it's going to create this environment file. It's going to create the contents of it. This is very important information. This you want to actually save in somewhere, some repository. Save it wherever you back up your important files, your SSH keys and whatever else. Make sure you have that there. You should be good. All right. So now that you have this, let's go back. We have this, and we've done DNS records. We have our object storage. We have our SMTP server. We have our server, and I already created the A record for hududemo.oitdemo.co. Now let's SSH in. So I'll go ahead and grab my favorite SSH client. Actually, my favorite SSH client is MobaXterm. I just don't want to open all that fun stuff. So I'll do root at hududemo.oitdemo.co. So now that we're in, there's a few things we need to do. We don't have to worry about installing Docker CE or Docker Compose. That's taken care of. What I do want to do, however, is the first thing I do on every brand new server. I'm going to apt-get update, and I'm going to update my repositories, make sure they're up to date. And I'm going to apt-get and upgrade. I'm going to make sure all my repositories are upgraded. This is self-hosting. This should go without saying, but it's very, very important that you're going to be maintaining your servers. So if you don't want to maintain your servers, talk to Jacob and the Hudu team. I know they had a cloud-hosted option at some point, or work it out with somebody that already has this. So I got my apt-get update, and now I'm going to do my apt-get upgrade. And the upgrade is actually doing the upgrade of those files. Now, if this is a production server, when I'm doing my upgrades, I'm going through and I'm paying attention to what it's actually upgrading. It's quite a few things because it's a brand new server. In this case, I'm going to hit yes, let it upgrade everything, because it's a demo server. I don't care. Now, keep in mind, apt-get does check dependencies. It does check the status of those files and the versions and make sure everything works well together. So it's not the end of the world. But in production, especially keep in mind, we manage a very large voice network. We only upgrade exactly what we want to upgrade. So we go for specific packages. And obviously you're going to want to do your snapshots or whatever else you're doing. DigitalOcean makes that very, very easy to do, so it's not a big deal. So this is going to go through upgrading each of those things. You can see there's quite a few packages. This is something you want to put on some kind of schedule, right? You want to do it once a month or whatever it is. You know what works for you. Also, Hudu, you're going to have to do maintenance upgrades with them as well. I'll take advantage and talk about that now while this is going on. The cool thing is, from what I've seen over the past year and change, Hudu's been very communicative of what updates or what releases come out. And when you need to update, one of the things I love about Docker is it's very easy to do. If you go down here on this page, maintenance of your Hudu instance, it's as simple as taking down your Docker, pulling down all the updates from the repository, bring it back up. You're done. So not a big deal. If Hudu also, while we're talking about this, Hudu's going to run its SSH, its SSL certificate renewals, so it's not something you have to worry about. But if something happens, they give you the documentation how to do it using Let's Encrypt, which is pretty awesome. Tells you exactly what you want to back up, how to restore from a backup. It's all pretty simple. Not a big deal. They even talk about scaling, which is nice. They talk about the number one thing that slows down your instance is memory as you grow. So just keep that in mind. You know what I mean? You don't want to, even though I'm going to have that other video with the swap file and all that fun stuff, you definitely want to have the resources you need. 1 gig may be fine for the beginning, but as you start to add stuff, definitely increase your resources. Now, the cool thing is DigitalOcean does let you increase resources as you need. They do not let you go the other way. You can't go from bigger to smaller. That'll mess some stuff up, so you definitely don't want to do that. So just keep that in mind. This should be wrapping up fairly quickly. I think this is at the end of these updates, so we should be good to go. Okay, so this is something, the resolver file is what's used for DNS. This is one of those cases I'm not actually going to let it overwrite my file. I'm going to keep my current installed version, so I'll hit no. And I think that's one of the last things. So all right, so once you see you're back at the prompt, you can go ahead and get started. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to follow this step 5 here, creating that directory for Hudu 2. So let's go ahead and make dir, spell it correctly, tilde Hudu 2. Then we'll go ahead and get to that directory. And then we're going to get this file, this dockercompose.yaml. Let's see here. Place file dockercompose.yaml. The contents can be found here. So there's a couple ways to do this. You could download the file to your local PC and then FTP it over, or WinSCP or whatever you want to do. I'm just going to do an easy command, wget, and I'll paste in that URL, and it'll copy the file. And you can do an ls, and you see it's there. Next thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take your env file and post it in there. Remember that env file is here. All this content is here. So I will go ahead and copy. And then, again, you can save the file locally, which you should have a copy saved locally. And then WinSCP or SFTP or whatever you want to do, I'm actually just going to use Nano, and I'm going to create it. For those of you Windows admins that haven't done Linux a lot, a dot file, a file that begins with dot, is a hidden file. So we're going to create a file called .env. I know you're used to seeing file name .extension. Linux doesn't care. And honestly, Windows doesn't care either. It's just use the extension for the file associations, for what apps to open or whatever to do with the file. But the .env file is perfectly valid. It's very common when you're creating applications, APIs, scripting to store your variables and or all your data, all your keys and stuff in there. It's pretty commonplace. So we're going to use Nano, which is basically Notepad for Linux. Please don't comment telling me how Vim is better or VI or whatever else. I don't care. I like Nano. That's where I'm comfortable. So it's Notepad. There you go. I will paste in here. And that has all my information. In Nano, you're going to do Control X, yes to save, and then hit enter. And now that file, if I do ls, you're not going to see it. It's a hidden file. Like I said, if I do ls-a, you will see the .env file. It's right there. So now that that's there, the next step is the one that's going to take a while. This Docker compose up. And I want to take a second because I want to talk about Docker, and I'll do it while this is happening. So Docker compose up. So this is going to do a lot of things. This is actually running that YAML file, that Docker, where is it here that we downloaded it? This Docker compose.yaml file. That file is actually giving a list of instructions on what to do. That's saying, I want to run this, I want to pull down and install this Redis database. I want to pull down and install this Postgres database. I want to pull down and install Let's Encrypt, and I want to do the same thing. I'm going to create an app called Hudu and download the package and run it. And it's going to have these dependencies. It's going to restart if there's an issue. It has all of these instructions. And while that's happening, I can actually go ahead and start another instance of Git Bash so you can read it. Now, one of the things I want to go ahead and bring up here is these instructions while it's doing this. This is probably the most frustrating part. Now, when you see pull, it's downloading from the cloud repositories, right? Pulling the app. One of the most frustrating parts of these installations is with Hudu, I've seen it can take upwards of 10 or 15 minutes each time you do this. All right. There's plenty of times where it looks like it froze or you see nothing happening. I promise, leave it alone. It's working. Okay. And I'll show you what to look for and how to do that. And there you see it's running, getting Redis. It's getting Let's Encrypt. It's doing a bunch of stuff. It's telling you here it's going to take a long time. It's going to take a long time for a lot of stuff. So we'll go ahead and SSH in while that's happening. And the server's working. And we'll get into that Hudu 2 folder. And that file, let's clear up that file. And we'll move this over here so you can still see what's going on, but let's go here. I want you to be able to understand what those Docker files are. They're actually really cool. So let's go ahead and cat that Docker file. And this Docker file is actually a list of instructions telling Docker what to do. That's one of the most so powerful things about Docker. If you've done AWS Lambda, it's the same thing. Lambda itself is not a server. It's just taking a series of instructions and doing a bunch of things with it, which is awesome. It's getting Postgres. It's getting Redis. It's downloading Hudu using the latest version of Hudu. It's telling it where to store files, what volumes to create. So it's doing all this, and this is how it knows. It even tells it what ports to use. This is how it knows what to do. And I think that's one of the most wonderful things about Hudu selecting Docker as the environment to do this in, because these instructions can apply in many, many environments, or operating systems, right? This can run on Ubuntu. This can run on CentOS. This can run on Windows. This can run on... Now, I'm saying Docker can run on Windows. I'm not saying Hudu can run on Windows, okay? So I want to be clear on that. But with that said, it is one of the very cool things that is about Docker. So this will keep going. This doesn't tell you, hey, I'm finished, okay? The best I can tell you is open a web browser, go to Hudu demo or whatever your thing is, and when you see this, it's done. When you see that web page, it's done, okay? Which is awesome. You're not finished with the installation process, but you're finished with that step, okay? So the next thing you're going to do is now we're going to need to install our SSL cert. So we're actually going to bring down Docker. And again, that's actually pretty simple. It's not a big deal. You can Control C. That'll go ahead. It's gracefully stopping. It's not forcing anything. It'll give you status updates. And this is one of the cool things. If you break the install process, right? This is one of the things where you can feel comfortable. If you break the install process, because it's based on a series of instructions, when you bring it back up, it's aware of itself. It will try to pull down everything again. And it'll say, I'm missing this. I have this. Ignore it. Don't pull it down again. I need another copy of this because the copy I have is no good. It makes it that much more that much more resilient, so you don't have to worry about these things. So let's go ahead and navigate over here. cd var www Hudu config nginx, which is the web server, and then cite the configuration file. In there, there's going to be that default file. That's right here, right? And again, Windows admins, don't worry that it doesn't have an extension. So we're going to remove that default file. rm is remove. So if we do ls again, it's gone. We're going to replace it with the one that's here. So let's go ahead and copy that link address. And now we're going to do wget. We're going to paste. If you're in PuTTY, just right-click as paste. I'm using git bash, so I have to right-click. I have a context menu. But if you're used to using PuTTY, which is probably what 90% of all other IT professionals you do, don't sweat it. Don't worry about like you don't have a context menu. So now that the file is there, we check. We're going to make sure that the contents are populated, which they are. And we're going to go back to our Hudu file. And let's clear this window up because it's a little too much. Now at this point, you're ready to bring up Docker. So now you're ready for the production version of Docker. You're ready to have it, hit the ground running. So the instructions say Docker compose up. And I'm not doing sudo because I'm already logged in as root. You can see that here. Not best practice. Best practice, log in as a user and then sudo to get to, whatever you need to do. But I'm just doing the default installation. So we're not going to talk there. And I'll give some wrap-up comments also about security when we're done here. But what we're going to do is we're going to do Docker compose up -d. So the reason I do it is this. Docker -compose is the Docker composer. It reads files. It does what it's supposed to do. When I say down, it tears down the servers. When I say up, it brings up the servers. So if I do Docker PS, that's going to tell me all the running servers right now. And as you would expect, there are no running servers. So if I went Docker compose up, it would start to run all that script again. But it would run the script in the session that I'm logged in. If I close the session, we're going to have a problem. That's not what I want. So I'm actually going to type -d. -d is going to detach the commands from the session that I'm running. It's going to run it as the system. So Docker is actually going to be running as a system. Now, here's the downside to this. You're going to see a bunch of done, and you think it's done, and it's not. If I go over to our server and I refresh, I'm going to get that bad gateway, okay? That's fine. It's doing what it's supposed to. So what I need to do to see what's going on is I'm going to do Docker compose logs -t-f, okay? Docker compose, those are the Docker composer commands. Logs will say, even though this is running as the system, let me see the logs. Let me see what's happening. And then the -t-f, just some flags. And this is all the stuff that it was doing. Remember the first time I ran Docker compose up, it was doing all this. You saw it all. It's doing the same thing. It's doing it in the back end. You're going to see a lot of these errors and stuff. Don't worry about it. You're going to see a lot where it says compiling and it looks like it's stuck, right? Don't worry about it. Even with the proper resources, the first couple times I did this, it took between 8 and 15 minutes each time. That's normal. It looks like it's frozen. That's normal. Leave it. The best thing I can tell you, go over here to your domain, to your web browser. Just keep refreshing. Do it every couple minutes. Don't go crazy on this. So it'll keep going. Don't worry about it. What I would do is every couple minutes go into here and just check to make sure that you're it's scrolling down when you hit enter that you want it to do. Because you want it to make sure that the session's still connected. So it's very straightforward, not a big deal. So let's go here. You see it's still in that compiling stage, and if I go here, I'm still probably going to see a bad gateway. Don't sweat it. It looks like that until eventually you get a sign-up screen that'll tell you put your name in, put your email address, put your company name. That's what we're looking for. So I'm going to go ahead and let this run. Like I said, it took 8 minutes, 10 minutes or so the first couple times. Let it do its thing. don't worry about it. Honestly, I would not even sweat it until you got to the 20-minute mark. At the 20-minute mark, if I refresh this page and I don't see my web page, and you have all the resources, you've done all these steps, you don't have any errors, that's when I'm starting to contact Hudu and see what can go on. But before the 20-minute mark, don't sweat it. We'll sit here and wait. All right, so once you see this, from what I've seen, this background saving terminated with success with the Redis app, that usually means you're done. Everything you saw pop up after is because I have the logs open. When I refresh the web page, you're seeing those logs. That's me doing it offsite. So if I do it here, now you see you're getting started with Hudu, you're up and running. So because of what we've done, I can close the session, right? Exit out of here, and Hudu's still running, which is great. I do want to teach you how to view the status of this Docker. So I'll go ahead and SSH back in. So if you do, let me make this a little bigger so it's easier to see. If you do Docker PS, it's going to tell you the status. Let's see here. There you go. It's going to tell you status. It's going to tell you the names of the Docker, actual Docker files or apps that are running. Those are called apps in Docker world. There's Hudu app 1, Hudu worker, Hudu DB, Hudu Redis, as well as the Let's Encrypt. And it tells you what their IDs are, their containers. It tells you what ports they have open. So this is running on port 3000, but nothing's open to the outside world. This is running on 5432, 6379. So the internal server, the VM, can communicate with itself. But here you see the outside world port 80 is going to the inside world port 80. The outside world 443 is going to the inside world 443. So nothing's actually open. Something else I want to check that I actually haven't checked here. Okay, so Ubuntu 20 on, and all the Ubuntu instances on that I've checked, 16, 18, 20, on DigitalOcean come with UFW, uncomplicated firewall. These are the default firewall rules that come out. 22 is open, and then limited to anywhere. These other ports are allowed. So do think about security. That's a little beyond what I want to do for this video. Personally, I would lock down SSH to just whatever your known IPs are, and then leave 443 and 80 open. If you're wondering why 443 and 80 are open but not showing here, the reason is this: UFW is a front end for IP tables. Docker actually works with IP tables directly. IP tables being the firewall. So Docker will do things to IP tables that will not show up in UFW, but it is cumulative. If I do something to block something in UFW, it will block in IP tables and will take effect. Like I said, that's a little more deep dive. DigitalOcean actually has its own security mechanisms for blocking things. We can go over that another day. Maybe we'll get somebody in the security space to help us out with it. We'll get Jason Slagle or maybe Kyle or one of the other team over at Huntress to give us best practices. But for now, this is what we are. So just so you know. With that said, you have your getting started with Hudu. Go ahead and give yourself your name, Hudu demo instance, demo biz. Of course, we're an MSP. Let's do Hudu demo at oitdemo.co. And let's create some really complicated password. And you're good to go. Get your license key from Hudu, but I originally thought when I saw this that it meant I couldn't use it without a license key. So the first version of this video that I recorded muted, it was actually, I was telling you that you couldn't do it without a license key. That's not true. If you take this off, you do have a working instance. It's limited, obviously. You need your key to get things done. It tells you how to get started, all the admin. but you see it's very snappy. It's actually really nice. There's that user that I just created. You can do 2FA. I've already done SSO on my instance. You can brand it. I really like it. I'm going to do another video on actually getting this, best practices and stuff like that. I can give you a quick what mine looks like. Actually using, we actually have it with Azure, so I can do SSO directly from Azure. Have it branded, obviously, with our stuff. It's really cool. So, but that's it. You have Hudu up and running. It doesn't take all that long. I know this video, we dragged things out to try to explain it to you, so I wanted to make sure that you knew what was going on. But with that said, it's very easy. If you have difficulty with anything, hit me up. I'll put my email in the on the screen, and also, or put it in the comments. We'll respond to the comments. If you want to see this done anywhere else, Vultr, Linode, AWS. If you want me to talk about security, or you have other technical topics you want to see us do videos on, please put it in the comments below, because I want us to do what's important to you. But thank you for joining us on this first episode of Technical Deficit with Ray and Friends. In future episodes, we're actually going to do this live with other people, so you can see all the mistakes that we make as we go on. But until next time, have a great day and the rest of your week.